Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are taking on a question that is just. It's timeless, really. It has haunted people across every single generation.
Oh, absolutely.
It's this agonizing conflict between believing in a just and fair world and then, the undeniable personal reality of suffering.
And we're diving deep into probably the most famous exploration of that ever written, the Book of Job.
We are.
Our source material really gives us this structural and philosophical roadmap through the whole text. It details the arguments, the back and forth, and the profound, maybe even unsettling resolution it offers.
Right. And our mission here is to move way beyond the simple Sunday school answers.
Yeah, no cliches.
We are looking for those profound nuggets of insight that get to the core of why we experience what we do in life and how we're supposed to process all that pain.
A huge topic. So where do we start?
Okay, let's start with the man himself, Job. When you're dealing with a text this old, the opening profile, it's everything. We meet him in the land of Uz, and the description is just glowing.
It really is.
Hmm.
He's called blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil.
So let's unpack that. What does blameless actually mean in this ancient context? Because to us, in modern English, that sounds like he was sinless.
And that's a crucial distinction. The Hebrew word, tam, it doesn't mean sinless perfection the way we might think of it. It's more about completeness, wholeness, moral integrity.
Okay, so he was whole.
Yeah, ethically perfect in his own sphere of responsibility. He was just wholeheartedly committed to pleasing God, showing this consistent piety. His righteousness wasn't, situational. It was who he was.
And his status, that was just as overwhelming. The sources really emphasize his extraordinary wealth.
They do.
And it's not just to show he was comfortable, it's to establish him as a true patriarch of the Eastern world. We are talking 7,000 sheep.
3,000 camels.
500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys. He was, and this is a direct quote, the greatest of all the people in the East.
That kind of wealth was measured in livestock, in family. He was an economic superpower of his day. Wow. But what's fascinating and what really seals his character is how his spiritual devotion mirrored his material success. He wasn't just rich. He was meticulously devoted.
Right. The text makes a point of this, his customary practice of offering burnt offerings for his children after their party.
Exactly. He was afraid they might have cursed God in their hearts.
So it's like a kind of spiritual paranoia.
You could call it that.
Right.
He's trying to cover even the unconscious private sins of his adult children. He is preemptively reconciling them with God. It's an incredible level of devotion.
So here's the picture. A man who is the absolute definition of success, materially, socially, spiritually. He has done everything right.
Everything.
And that, of course, brings us to the core tension that kicks off this whole story. Why would God choose to test an extremely righteous man?
And that is the paradox of the entire book. The prologue, this revelation that this whole experiment starts in heaven, completely outside of Job's knowledge. It's meant to shatter a certain way of thinking. If Job suffers while he is righteous, it proves that righteousness isn't a guarantee against suffering. It's not some cosmic insurance policy.
Which is where we have to talk about the retributive dogma, this belief that's been around forever. Good things happen to good people, bad things to bad people.
Exactly. Prosperity means you're good. Suffering means you've sinned. It's a neat, tidy system.
And the Book of Job is a frontal assault on that.
The total assault. It says that the relationship between God and humanity isn't some transactional give-and-get bargain based on how good you are.
So what is it based on?
It's based on God's sovereign grace and, well, the quality of human trust. Job's suffering, while he's innocent, reveals that the foundation of the relationship isn't retribution. It's loyalty, faith, and obedience, even when you're outside the comfort of, well, the hedge.
Speaking of the hedge, this is where the story gets really, really interesting. We shift scenes immediately. We're in part 1 now. The heavenly court.
Right. And this is where this cosmic wager is struck. Completely outside the awareness of the man who is about to lose literally everything.
The scene is set. A gathering of the sons of God, which is often understood to mean the angelic court.
They're all presenting themselves before the Lord. And right in the middle of them, the adversary Satan arrives. He's the great accuser, and his presence just signals that spiritual warfare is about to begin.
And it's God who initiates the conflict. He asks Satan, "Where have you been?"
And Satan gives that famously ominous reply that he's been roving about on the earth and from walking back and forth across it.
He's scouting, assessing the human condition, looking for vulnerabilities, for weakness.
He is. And God throws down the gauntlet. He basically boasts about Job's character. Have you considered my servant Job?
And Satan, the ultimate cynic, he immediately counters.
He doesn't deny Job's behavior, which is interesting. He questions the motive.
Ah, okay.
He says, sure, Job is loyal, but only because God has protected him. And this is that famous hedge. God has blessed his household, his livestock, his work. Satan frames the entire relationship as purely mercenary. Job is in it for himself.
The hedge is such a powerful metaphor, isn't it? This comfortable barrier that keeps out all the chaos and suffering of the world.
It is. And Satan's challenge is simple. Remove the hedge, and Job will prove himself to be fundamentally selfish. His obedience is prompted by blessing, not by love.
He's so certain.
Oh, he uses this formula of absolute certainty. He says, extend your hand and strike everything he has, and he will no doubt curse you to your face. That's the wager. Satan is staking his entire position on the failure of human integrity under pressure.
And God grants permission. He gives Satan power over everything Job owns, but he draws a very hard line.
A critical line. Only do not extend your hand against the man himself. This is the first test.
It's so vital for you, the listener, to get this distinction. God is not the author of the temptation or the suffering.
No. God is allowing the testing to happen through the agency of the adversary. And this permission is granted for a higher purpose, to silence that accuser, and ultimately to refine Job's character.
And the results of this permission, they are immediate and just devastating. We move right into the first catastrophe.
And the structure of the reporting is intentionally overwhelming. You have 4 sole survivors arriving one after the other, delivering this compounding tragedy. It's not just one bad day.
It's a rapid, organized destruction of everything.
Everything. First, the Sabaeans steal the oxen, donkeys, and they kill the servants.
And before that messenger has even finished talking, a second one arrives.
Right, saying the fire of God, which is likely lightning, but orchestrated by Satan, it consumed all the sheep and the rest of the servants.
The irony there is powerful. The second messenger blames the disaster directly on God.
Which must have just instantly complicated how Job is processing this. Then the third blow, the Chelleans raid the camels.
Yeah.
And finally, the ultimate human loss. The fourth messenger arrives.
And this messenger reports that a great wind swept across the wilderness and killed all 10 of Job's children as they were feasting in the eldest brother's house.
His livelihood, his status, his wealth, his servants, and his entire future through his children. All of it gone in just rapid succession. It's a complete psychological and material annihilation.
I mean, can you imagine being that fourth messenger, having to deliver that news after the first 3 reports? The emotional weight is just crushing.
And this is it. This is the moment of truth that tests the sincerity of his piety. Does he lash out in rage?
Does he prove Satan right?
Exactly. But no. He tears his robe, he shaves his head, the deepest forms of mourning, and then he throws himself down on the ground and he worships.
He maintains worship even in the midst of all that rubble. And that crucial quote, Job 1.21, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will return there. The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. May the name of the Lord be blessed."
This response vindicated God immediately. Job didn't charge God with any moral impropriety. He accepted God's sovereign right to give and to take away, even without an explanation.
He trusted the giver more than the gifts.
Absolutely. Satan was proven wrong on the first test.
But the trial, unfortunately, is not over. The heavenly court reconvenes in chapter 2 for the second test.
And God praises Job for still holding on to his integrity, despite being provoked to destroy him without reason.
But Satan, being the relentless accuser he is, he just shifts his ground.
He does. His argument now is skin for skin. He suggests Job was willing to sacrifice his possessions and his family other people's skin to save his own.
He's implying that Job's integrity is cheap, that it's conditional on his own personal, physical survival.
So he demands to strike Job's body. Extend your hand and strike his bone and his flesh, and he will no doubt curse you to your face.
And once again, God grants permission, but with that one non-negotiable exception, Job's life must be preserved.
And the affliction is immediate and gruesome. Job is struck with these malignant ulcers, spreading from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. This was an excruciating, humiliating disease.
It sounds like it could have been a combination of things. Elephantiasis, leprosy, some kind of severe dermatitis.
Whatever it was, it required him to sit in ashes, a social outcast, scraping the infection and pus with a piece of broken pottery.
The sources detail the agonizing symptoms. His skin covered in sores, his breath was foul, he had a loathsome smell, his bones were racked with burning pain. He was forced into this unclean condition, sitting outside the city where he used to be the most respected man.
And that's when the temptation comes from the person closest to him,
Yeah.
his wife.
You have to feel for her, too. She's suffered the exact same losses, her wealth, her servants, and all 10 of her children.
Of course. And
Yeah.
now she's watching her husband endure this agonizing physical decay. She basically concludes the whole system is broken. God is unfair.
So she urges him, are you still holding firmly to your integrity? Curse God and die.
She's operating entirely within that retributive dogma, right?
100%. If you're righteous, you get blessed. If you're suffering this horribly, your integrity is useless. Just end the suffering and, with it, the relationship with God.
And Job's reply is just a moment of profound theological submission. It is. He says, you're talking like one of the godless women would do. Should we receive what is good from God and not also receive what is evil?
Wow.
The source notes that he didn't exclude her from sharing in the suffering, recognizing her words were born from her own grief. But his submission, his refusal to sin with his lips, even in agony, proved Satan wrong again. The cosmic wager was decided in heaven, but Job had no idea. Now, the human reaction begins.
And that sets the stage perfectly for part 2. The trial by fire is done. Now the trial by verbal assault is about to begin.
Exactly. And it's important to appreciate the dynamics here. The 3 counselors arrive, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar.
They travel from far away.
They do. And when they see Job, they don't even recognize him because his disfigurement is so severe. They weep, they tear their robes, and then they sit silently with him for 7 days and 7 nights.
That initial act of empathy is maybe the most profound thing they do in the entire book.
I think so. 7 days of silence is an incredible act of respect and shared grief.
And here is a nugget of insight for you, the listener, that should really stay with you. Explanations never heal a broken heart.
That's it right there. Their silence was healing, their words were wounding. If they had just listened to him, accepted his feelings, they would have helped him immeasurably.
But they couldn't stand the ambiguity of innocent suffering.
No. They felt they had to explain God's justice. And in doing that, they went from being witnesses of his suffering to his prosecuting attorneys.
And it's Job who finally breaks the silence with his lament in chapter 3. He curses the day of his birth, wishing he had died instantly. He longs for death as a place of rest.
And this lament, it's the heart of his intellectual struggle. Job is tormented because the God he has always known, the just, predictable, rewarding God, seems totally irreconcilable with the God he's experiencing now.
The arbitrary, powerful, silent God.
Right. His why is a search for meaning, not just a complaint about being uncomfortable. He can't square his blameless life with his current state, so he longs for non-existence.
And his lament immediately sets off his friends. They cannot, for theological reasons, accept that a good man might suffer.
No. Because if Job is truly innocent, then God must be unjust. And they can't possibly accuse God of injustice.
So they have to accuse Job of some great hidden sin, which forces them to defend that rigid theological cornerstone, the retributive dogma.
Let's break down the rhetorical failures of these 3 men, starting with Eliphaz in chapters 4 and 5. His whole argument is based on personal experience.
Right, and some mysterious vision he had. He opens with this rhetorical question to trap Job. Call to mind now, who, being innocent, ever perished?
It's pure confirmation bias, dressed up as wisdom. Eliphaz is basically saying, look around, Job. I've never seen a truly innocent man destroyed.
So since Job is being destroyed, he must not be innocent.
Exactly. He asserts that those who plow iniquity and those who sow trouble reap the same. So he urges Job to seek God, accept the discipline, repent, and then his prosperity will come back.
But his whole approach is just so clinical and cold. He's forcing Job into this mold of a great sinner just to keep his own worldview intact.
The lesson there is profound. Personal experience alone is way too limited and subjective to answer these huge questions of divine governance. You can't judge another person's relationship with God by what you see on the outside.
Okay, so then we get Bildad in chapter 8. He argues from tradition.
Right. If Eliphaz was the existentialist using his private experience, Bildad is the rigid traditionalist. He appeals to the wisdom of the ancients.
He believes tradition is sufficient proof, and his core belief is the unshakable justice of God.
And this leads to his most shocking and callous statement, the one about Job's dead children.
I mean, it's brutal.
It is.
Yeah.
Bildad states essentially that Job's children sinned and got just what they deserved. The implication is that God is so just, he swiftly punishes the guilty.
And if Job repents, God will restore his righteous home.
And he uses these vivid natural illustrations, like a papyrus plant withering without water, to imply that Job has separated himself from God, the source of his life.
The problem with Bildad is just his rigidity. He refuses to reevaluate his theory, even with the new evidence of Job's innocence right in front of him.
He's the definition of closed-minded dogmatism.
And finally, Zophar, chapter 11. He's the most vicious of the three, arguing from pure intuition and dogmatism.
Yeah, he doesn't even bother with experience or tradition. He just states what he believes to be true. He calls Job arrogant and full of useless words.
And then comes the sarcasm, the brutal sarcasm.
It's really something. Zophar wishes God would speak and reveal to you the secrets of wisdom so that you would know that God has forgiven some of your sins.
The implication is devastating. He's saying, Job, you think you're suffering a lot, but God is actually giving you less punishment than you deserve.
It's theological cruelty. It just erases any claim Job has to integrity. And then he offers the standard path to restoration, repentance, prayer, reform.
So you have Eliphaz with experience, Bildad with tradition, and Zophar with intuition, and they all land on the same harmful conclusion.
Job is a great sinner who must confess or die. That's the weight he's facing.
But Job fights back, and his retort is memorable. He calls them worthless physicians and miserable comforters.
He uses that great analogy of a wadi, a seasonal stream. It's full and flowing when you don't need it, but when you're desperate for water in the heat, it's completely dry. Treacherous friends.
He says they're afraid to comfort him because that might imply they approve of his sin, and they're afraid God might punish them next.
So they just compound his suffering by trying to force a confession.
Yeah.
But Job, he acknowledges God's sheer terrifying power. He knows God controls nature and nations.
But that power is exactly what terrifies him because it seems so arbitrary. Job insists that God is destroying the blameless and the guilty alike. The innocent are suffering right alongside the wicked.
He says if he were to argue with God, he could not answer him 1 time in 1,000. God is simply too mighty to be held accountable in a court of law.
And this is his legal dilemma. He sees God as both his legal adversary and the ultimate judge. He can't sue God and win.
No. And he can't even argue his case because God's majesty would shatter his composure. And this leads to that desperate defining cry in chapter 9 for a neutral party. An arbiter or mediator.
Someone who could lay his hand on us both.
Right. Someone who can stand between the finite, suffering man and the infinite, terrifying God. The source material points out that this is the real problem of the book. Not solving the suffering intellectually, but finding a right relationship with God that makes existence in suffering holy. Job needs a bridge.
And he sinks further into despair, contrasting the finality of human life with a tree that can be cut down but sprout again.
Humans, once they fall, they're gone forever. He believes in the afterlife, Sheol, the grave, but at first only as a place of gloom and shadows.
Yet within that deep despair, there is this little flicker of hope.
There is. In chapter 14, he asks God to hide him in Sheol until God's wrath has passed, hoping God might set me a time and then remember me. He's longing for this theoretical possibility of resurrection, a time when he could stand before God after death to finally get the answers he's being denied now.
The next rounds of speeches just intensify everything. The friends, they can't counter his logic, so they just double down on the threats.
They do. They try to convict his conscience by just stressing the awful fate of the wicked over and over again. Eliphaz even accuses Job of being a menace to society.
Because his defiance might dissuade others from seeking God.
Exactly. And Bildad, again, paints these vivid pictures of the miserable life of the wicked. Their light being put out, hunted down by calamity, dragged off to the king of terrors.
He's using all this to imply that Job has all the external marks of a condemned man.
And Job is just stunned by their lack of compassion. He asks them, "How long will you torment me and crush me with your words?" He feels like God has trapped him in a net.
And yet from this rock bottom, abandoned by everyone, mocked by youngsters, a sudden, incredible theological breakthrough emerges.
It does. And this is part 3. A vindicator and the prosperity of the wicked.
This is the great confession of chapter 19. Job feels hunted by God, completely alone, and he makes this incredible declaration. He wishes his words could be preserved forever.
He does. Oh, that they were written on a scroll, or with an iron stylus and lead, that they were engraved in the rock forever.
He's certain that what he's about to say is so important it has to survive his own death.
And the declaration is just momentous. As for me, I know that my Redeemer or Vindicator lives, and that as the last, he will stand upon the earth.
Redeemer, that word, goel, it carries immense legal weight, doesn't it?
It does. It's the kinsman who has the right and the duty to defend his relative, to buy back property, to avenge a wrong. Job is proclaiming that even if he dies in agony, he has a divine defender who will arrive at the end of time to vindicate him.
And that expectation goes beyond the grave. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. He's anticipating a face-to-face encounter with God after he dies.
It's an astounding leap of faith. He's locating his self-worth in his relationship with God, not in his circumstances or his own moral behavior. This just totally collapses that give-and-get bargain theology.
And this breakthrough gives him this eternal perspective, which frees him up to look at the immediate reality around him with clear eyes.
And that new clarity lets him demolish the friend's core argument in chapter 21, just by observing the real world.
He looks out and says simply, "The wicked prosper."
Yeah. He asks, why do the wicked go on living, grow old, even increase in power? They live safe lives, their houses are secure, their animals breed, their children dance, and they die in peace.
And they spend their whole lives openly telling God to turn away from us. We do not want to know your ways.
It's a devastating empirical challenge. If the friend's premise were true, these openly wicked people should be suffering horribly, but they're thriving. Job is saying that the tidy, direct link between sin and misery is just demonstrably false.
He points to the injustice of delay. Full justice is simply not carried out in this life.
And he also points to the leveling effect of death. The powerful wicked man and the bitter oppressed man. They both lie down in the dust and worms cover over them both.
Physically, death makes them equal.
He's arguing that his friends were trying to put God in a box, limiting the sovereign actions of the Creator based on their own narrow ideas. He knows his friends are still thinking about him when they talk about the wicked, but he insists, go ask any traveler. They'll tell you the wicked frequently prosper.
He concludes his defense with this massive, impassioned appeal, his final defense in chapters 29 to 31.
He starts by recounting his former glory, how respected and honored he was. He details his immersion in social justice. He was eyes for the blind and feet for the lame, a father to the needy.
He thought he would die peacefully, his days as numerous as the grains of sand.
And he contrasts that glory with his current crushing shame in chapter 30. He's mocked by youth so contemptible he wouldn't have let their fathers guard his sheepdogs. He feels abandoned by God, flung into the mud.
His defense culminates in that magnificent oath of innocence in chapter 31. He defends his integrity against this huge list of sins.
All of them. Sexual immorality, cheating his servants, failing the poor or the widow, idolatry like worshiping the sun or moon.
He's covering all the bases: personal, social, and spiritual integrity. He wraps up this negative confession with a final challenge.
He does. Here is my signature. Let the Almighty answer me. If only I had an indictment that my accuser had written. He rests his case. The human dialogue is over.
And the argument has reached a total impasse. The friends have nothing left to say because Job is righteous in his own eyes. He won't confess a sin he didn't commit.
And this sets the stage for a dramatic shift. Before God speaks, we get Elihu.
Part 4. Elihu and God's theophany. Elihu, a younger friend, enters the debate. He's been waiting his turn.
And he's angry. Angry at the three older friends for failing to answer Job, and angry at Job for justifying himself rather than God.
Elihu acts as this kind of pivot point, doesn't he, between human rationality and divine revelation.
He does. He says age doesn't always bring wisdom because there is a spirit in people, the breath of the Almighty, that makes them understand. He claims to speak directly from inspiration.
And his major theological contribution is different from the retributive dogma. He suggests suffering is educational and disciplinary.
Right. Not always punitive. God uses pain, affliction, and sickness to warn, to correct, and to turn a person from destructive pride or to keep them from corruption. It's a tool of correction, not just condemnation.
He sees that Job's complaints about God's silence are rooted in a kind of arrogance.
Yeah, the pride of a man who thinks his righteousness obligates God to reward him or explain himself. Elihu argues that man's actions, good or bad, don't affect God directly. They only affect other people. God is sovereign and under no obligation to respond to our morality.
And interestingly, Elihu seems to get the need for grace, for an intermediary. He mentions an angel, one mediator out of 1,000, who can intercede and find a ransom.
That figure helps turn the sufferer back to God. So Elihu is really preparing Job and all of us for the need for a non-human intervention. He's building the case for the Creator's majesty, setting the rhetorical stage for the most famous intervention in the entire book.
God speaking from the whirlwind. Chapter 38, the moment we've been waiting for.
And God intervenes. but not as the defendant on trial, which is what Job expected. He steps in as the prosecuting attorney and the ultimate judge.
The challenge is sharp and direct. Who is this who darkens counsel with words without knowledge? God is confronting Job for speaking presumptuously and clouding the truth.
And he tells Job to get ready for a difficult task like a man and answer a series of questions.
And this begins the divine oral science exam, this massive rapid-fire sequence of over 70 questions covering cosmology, oceanography, meteorology, astronomy, zoology.
And it isn't just trivia. God is systematically establishing the limits of Job's knowledge and power. He asks, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth?" The point being, you were absent at creation, so you lack the information necessary to judge my governance of the universe.
The questions are so vivid and impossible for Job to answer. Can he command the morning? Does he know where the snow and hail are stored? Can he guide the massive constellations, Pleiades and Orion, in their paths?
These are questions about controlling the cosmos itself. The implication is huge. If Job can't understand or control God's ways with nature, the basic mechanics of the physical universe, how could he possibly comprehend or judge God's infinitely more complex dealings with people?
God's ways are just inscrutable to the finite mind.
And this is reinforced by the animal catalog. God questions Job on these strange, specific animals: the lion, the raven, the wild donkey, the wild ox, and especially the ostrich.
The description of the ostrich is so striking. God deprived of wisdom and did not impart understanding to her, and yet she's still part of God's intentional creation.
It shows that God allows each creature to experience what is his will for them, for reasons known only to him. The ostrich is fearless and foolish, but God sustains it. The core point is, Job cannot have the comprehensive knowledge needed to make the theological judgments he was making.
The only wise course of action is submission and adoration, not judgment.
But God isn't finished. He issues a second challenge in chapter 40 to drive the point home. Would you indeed annul my justice? Would you declare me guilty so that you might be right?
Wow. God is accusing Job of criticizing him just to justify himself. Job has implicitly placed himself above God.
And to further humble him, God points to two terrifying, incomprehensible creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan. These aren't just mythical beasts, they're forces of nature, representing the chaos and immense power that exists outside of human control.
Behemoth is described in such detail. It eats grass like an ox, its tail is stiff like a cedar, its bones are tubes of bronze. It's the first among God's works.
And then Leviathan, the ultimate symbol of unconquerable power. A creature, king over all that are proud. Its scales are like shields shut tight. Fire comes from its mouth, and it laughs at weapons.
God uses these powerful monsters to show that his actions and purposes go way beyond human rationality. If Job can't even subdue these creatures, how foolish was it for him to think he could question their creator?
And that leads us right into part 5. Submission, vindication, and the final truth. Job's first reply to God's massive examination is brief and humble.
Right. Indeed, I am completely unworthy. How could I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth to silence myself. He's just silenced by the encounter.
But the deeper change happens in his full confession in chapter 42. He acknowledges God's sheer, terrifying omnipotence. I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted.
And the nature of his repentance is absolutely key here, isn't it?
It is. He repents, not of some secret sins that caused his suffering, but of his arrogant attitude, his presumptuous speech, his attempt to judge God from a position of ignorance.
He says, I have declared without understanding things too wonderful for me to know. I despise myself, and I repent in dust and ashes.
And this marks the transformation. Job says he had only heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye has seen you.
Secondhand knowledge, the theological rules his friends taught, was replaced by spiritual insight and renewed fellowship.
Exactly. He stops asking the philosophical why, because he has encountered the sovereign, omnipotent, and wise who. He has attained a right relationship with God, which is better than any intellectual answer.
And the moment of submission is followed by this profound and unexpected twist. The friends are condemned.
They are. God declares his anger toward Eliphaz and his 2 friends. You have not spoken about me what is right, as my servant Job has.
This is the definitive indictment of the retributive dogma. The friends claim to be defending God, but in doing so, they spoke untruths about his nature.
They endorsed Satan's view of Job as a hypocrite. They were self-righteous, relying on their own flawed human rationality.
Job, however impatient and ignorant he was honest in his complaint. He spoke the truth of his painful experience.
The friends lied about God to make their system work. And here we find the profound conclusion to Job's earlier cry for a mediator.
The friends now have to offer sacrifices, and Job has to intercede for them. He becomes the mediator he had previously desired.
Job, the man whose integrity was questioned, now stands as the intercessor for those who condemned him. It's the ultimate proof of his vindication.
And finally, Job's restoration. After he prayed for his friends, God doubled all that had belonged to Job. 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels.
And he was blessed with new children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. He lived another 140 years.
It's interesting, the source notes that the daughters, unlike the sons, are named for their beauty, Jemima, Keziah, and Karen Hapuk, and they received an inheritance alongside their brothers.
A rare detail suggesting the immense esteem in which they were held.
And this restoration signals that the trial is definitively over. It's not a transactional reward for his piety, is it?
No. It's an expression of God's sovereign grace and faithfulness, confirming the integrity Job displayed during his suffering. God writes the last chapter, and we're just called to trust the whole narrative, not just the painful middle parts.
So let's step back and synthesize the various perspectives we found in this dialogue about the source of pain, the epistemology of suffering, if you will.
We saw several competing views. Job's wife used empiricism, what she saw, and concluded God is unfair. The friends used rationalism and tradition and concluded suffering must be punitive.
Job himself wrestled with rationalism and briefly concluded God was arbitrary.
And then Elihu used human inspiration and suggested suffering is primarily educational and disciplinary, meant to humble and refine us.
But the definitive answer comes from God's revelation from the whirlwind.
Right, which says suffering is permitted for development, to demonstrate God's glory, and to prove the sincerity of human faith in the face of chaos. It's designed to lead the individual from secondhand knowledge to a first-hand encounter.
So the key lessons we can extract are timeless. First, God is in control, even when he appears distant or silent.
Second, suffering is sometimes permitted by God, even through the adversary, for our growth and testing. God isn't the source of evil, but he can use hardship to refine our character.
Third, the relationship with God is founded on grace through faith and loyalty, not some mechanical transactional bargain based on your performance.
And fourth, and maybe the most humbling lesson of all, it is foolish for finite humanity to criticize the infinite creator or try to put him in a box of our own theological design. Our wisdom lies in submitting to his sovereignty and trusting him, even without an explanation.
We started with this immense tension between belief and suffering, and the dialogue gave us countless human attempts to rationalize what is ultimately a mystery. The text concludes that the problem of pain isn't solved by an intellectual answer to why.
No, it's solved by a transformative existential encounter with who God is, omnipotent, sovereign, and profoundly caring.
And reflecting on this, it's significant that Elihu was the one character who wasn't condemned by God.
His words that suffering is educational and a call to learn were the closest human perspective to preparing Job for that final divine revelation.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the learner. Given that suffering is often allowed for growth, designed to move us from simply hearing about God to truly seeing him, what is the specific lesson or spiritual insight God is currently teaching you that you could only be learning or perhaps only perceive in the crucible of pain? Something to mull over until our next deep dive.